Black woman asked to switch VIP seats for white passenger. One call later, the entire team is fired. What would you do if someone tried to take what you rightfully earned just because they believed they were more deserving? Let's begin. The low hum of the plane's engines created a comforting backdrop as Grace Williams settled into her luxurious seat at the front of the cabin. She exhaled slowly, relishing a brief moment of calm after a week of intense work. Her window view presented a sweeping scene of the airport below, bathed in the fading light of the sun. This was her time, a small but well-earned escape. Grace had come a long way from her humble beginnings. Raised in a working-class neighborhood, she had worked tirelessly to build a life of success and independence. Now, as the founder of a rapidly growing media company, Grace was on her way to finalize a deal that would launch her business to a new level of prominence. She adjusted the soft scarf around her neck and reached for her sleek black briefcase, inhaling the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the delicate perfumes of her fellow passengers. A flight attendant smiled as he passed by, offering her a glass of sparkling water. Grace accepted it with a nod, savoring the cool, refreshing taste. Everything felt right. But, as Grace would soon find out, things were about to take a turn. A noise at the front of the cabin snapped her attention away from her thoughts. Grace glanced up to see a tall, platinum-haired woman striding toward first class. The woman exuded an unmistakable air of entitlement, her designer handbag swinging from her arm like a trophy. Behind her was another woman, shorter, with a nervous smile that suggested she was following reluctantly. Grace overheard a few words from their conversation as they passed by her row. "I don't believe this," the blonde woman said, clearly displeased. "This is unacceptable. They got my seat wrong." Her companion laughed nervously. "Maybe it's a mix-up. They'll sort it out." Grace felt her unease grow as the two women stopped beside her. The blonde woman, whose gaze had already flicked to Grace, was tapping her manicured fingers against the side of her handbag. Grace turned her focus back to her briefcase, deliberately ignoring the encounter. She had dealt with people like her before, those who made assumptions based on appearance rather than merit. "Excuse me," the blonde woman snapped, her tone sharp. Grace looked up calmly. "Yes? I think there's been a mistake," the woman said, her eyes scanning Grace's seat with an air of superiority. "This is my seat, and I'm certain you've been assigned incorrectly." Grace raised an eyebrow. "This is my seat, 1A. I booked it weeks ago." The woman's smile twisted into something tight and insincere. "You see, I'm a top-tier member with this airline. I always get priority seating, and you don't belong here. I think you should find another seat." Grace held her gaze for a moment, then replied, her voice steady, "I'm very comfortable where I am. Thank you." The woman's expression hardened, and her companion looked increasingly uncomfortable, like she wanted no part of this confrontation. Before either could speak again, a flight attendant appeared, walking briskly toward them. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his uniform sharp and his posture authoritative. "Yes," the blonde woman said immediately, her voice now dripping with drama. "This seat has been given to someone else by mistake, and I need it fixed right away." The attendant glanced at Grace, who spoke calmly. "There's no mistake. This is my seat, and I have the ticket to prove it." The attendant hesitated, caught between the two women's conflicting claims. "Let me double-check your ticket, ma'am," he said politely, though Grace could sense his uncertainty. Grace handed over her boarding pass, her heart steady. She had dealt with situations like this before, in business meetings, in everyday life, where her place in the world was questioned. This was just another test. The attendant examined the boarding pass for a moment, and then nodded. "This is indeed your seat, Ms. Williams." The blonde woman's face flushed with frustration. "That can't be. She must have upgraded at the last minute," she sneered, glancing at Grace as if she were beneath her. Grace didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she looked the woman directly in the eye and said, "I suggest you take your assigned seat. This conversation is over." Her companion whispered something urgently in her ear, but the blonde woman wasn't ready to back down. "I don't think you understand who I am," she muttered darkly. "I always fly first class. I'm not about to let someone like—" Her friend cut her off with a sharp hiss. The flight attendant cleared his throat. I'm sorry, ma'am. But if you have any further concerns, I suggest you speak to our supervisor. The woman glared at him before storming toward the front of the cabin, dragging her companion behind her. The flight attendant shot Grace a brief, apologetic look before walking away. Grace sat back in her seat, her expression unreadable, though she could feel the weight of other passengers' curious glances. This wasn't the first time she had been scrutinized in this way, but she wasn't going to let anyone undermine her. She took a deep breath and returned to her notes, but the sense of unease lingered. This wasn't over. Later in the flight, as the plane neared its destination, Grace was reviewing her strategy for a meeting she would soon be attending. The soft buzz of the cabin around her was suddenly interrupted by a tap on her shoulder. Grace turned, expecting the usual distraction, but the person standing before her was none other than the woman who had tried to claim her seat. The blonde woman thrust a small envelope into her hands, not saying a word. Grace opened it to find a business card and a hastily scribbled note. Your actions today have cost me more than you realize. Don't expect this to be over. Evelyn. Grace stared at the note for a moment, her fingers tightening around the card. This wasn't just a simple seat dispute. Something bigger was unfolding. Upon landing, Grace was one of the last passengers to leave the plane. As she walked toward the terminal, she overheard a conversation between airport staff and soon realized what had happened. Evelyn had contacted higher-ups within the airline, using her loyalty status as leverage, and as a result, the entire crew that had handled the situation had been dismissed for mishandling the issue. Grace learned that the flight attendants had been let go for not resolving the situation more forcefully in Evelyn's favor. But in the end, it wasn't just Evelyn who faced consequences. It was the entire team that had enabled her behavior. Grace walked out of the terminal with her head held high, the business deal still firmly in her grasp. Evelyn, on the other hand, would find her actions had caused far more harm than she could have imagined. In a world where entitlement often tries to push others down, Grace's quiet strength reminded everyone that standing your ground doesn't always require raising your voice. Sometimes, it's about keeping your dignity intact and letting the truth speak for itself. As the plane touched down and Maya walked out of the terminal, the contrast between her composure and Evelyn's smoldering frustration couldn't have been clearer. Evelyn had tried to assert her dominance, leaning on her supposed privilege to get what she wanted. But in the end, it was Maya's quiet confidence and unwavering integrity that won the day. Not only did Maya stand her ground, but her actions also sent a powerful message to everyone around her. Sometimes, it's not about the loudest voice or the most desperate plea. It's about remaining grounded in your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish you. Evelyn may have thought her position in the world was secure because of her loyalty to the airline, but true power lies in the ability to inspire respect, not demand it. The consequences of Evelyn's actions were far-reaching, affecting not just herself, but the entire team that enabled her behavior. Meanwhile, Maya walked away from the situation with more than just a comfortable seat. She carried with her the unshakable knowledge that no one could ever steal her place again. In a world that often rewards entitlement, Maya proved that resilience, dignity, and grace can turn the tide in your favor, even when the odds are stacked against you. Maya's story is a reminder that, in the face of entitlement, staying true to yourself is the most powerful form of resistance. While others might try to break you down or question your place, your quiet strength can rewrite the narrative. Maya's grace and resolve prove that respect isn't handed out, it's earned.